12 men crossed into Harlem with orders to end Bumpy Johnson tonight, believing numbers decide fate. Until silence settled, doors closed, and the street waited to see who would walk back out. The decision was made far from Harlem, in a room that smelled of smoke and impatience. Dutch Schultz didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. 12 men stood, listening, already knowing what the night required. They crossed north as a unit, coats buttoned, hats low, weapons hidden where confidence usually lives. Harlem felt it before it saw them. Storefronts dimmed. Conversations shortened. A neighborhood learns the difference between visitors and intruders. Bumpy Johnson did not receive a warning call. He didn't need one. His name worked faster than telephones. It moved through barbershops, stairwells, back rooms. Men who owed him favors didn't speak. They simply waited. The 12 spread out, thinking space was safety. They mistook quiet for weakness. Every step echoed longer than it should have. Every door they passed seemed heavier, more permanent. Bumpy remained where he was. No speeches. No orders shouted. He understood the shape of the night. Harlem was not a battlefield. It was a house, and strangers had walked inside without asking. Windows watched. Corners listened. The air tightened. The men from downtown felt it then, a pressure without hands. They had brought guns, numbers, certainty. What they hadn't brought was permission. By the time the first shadow shifted, escape was already gone. Not because of force, because the city had decided, calmly and together, that this night would belong to Bumpy Johnson. No sirens followed them. No chaos announced what was coming. Just a slow closing of distance, like walls remembering their purpose. The men understood, too late, that Harlem did not rush. It waited, patient, disciplined, loyal, until the moment arrived. That patience had a name, and it was spoken carefully tonight. Harlem did not need instructions when Bumpy Johnson's name settled into the night. It moved the way weather moves, quiet, unavoidable, understood. Men adjusted their posture. Women closed doors a little slower. Nobody panicked. Panic was for places without structure. Bumpy's authority was not built on shouting or spectacle. It came from memory, from winters when money ran thin and food still arrived, from disputes that ended with handshakes instead of funerals, from knowing that if trouble came, it would stop at his line and go no further. He sat calmly, listening more than speaking. The room around him stayed steady. No one asked what should be done. They knew. Harlem had learned its rhythm from him. Measured, deliberate, restrained. The streets outside reflected that discipline. A man sweeping his storefront paused, then continued. A doorman leaned against the frame, eyes forward. Boys on the corner stopped laughing, not out of fear but respect. They understood the difference between chaos and correction. Bumpy believed power only mattered if it protected something. Community wasn't a word to him. It was a responsibility. Harlem wasn't his territory. It was his obligation. And obligations were met without ceremony. The 12 men moving through the neighborhood didn't see him. They didn't need to. His presence was already ahead of them, behind them, beside them. It lived in the way no one offered directions, in the way no one asked questions, in the way silence began to feel intentional. Years earlier, others had tried the same mistake. Loud men, armed men, men who thought reputation came from noise. They learned what restraint could do when backed by loyalty. Harlem remembered. Harlem always remembered. Bumpy rose slowly, not because the moment demanded urgency, but because standing felt appropriate. A man near the door nodded once. That was enough. The understanding passed without language. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about balance. Harlem functioned because lines were respected. Tonight, those lines had been crossed deliberately, and deliberate actions required deliberate responses. Outside, footsteps slowed. The night seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, one of the 12 realized they hadn't been followed, and that frightened him more than being chased ever could. Bumpy adjusted his coat. He didn't check a weapon. He didn't look at the clock. Time, tonight, belonged to him. Harlem had already chosen its side, not because it was ordered to, but because loyalty when cultivated properly, does not need commands. The 12 began to understand their error in pieces. Not all at once. Harlem did not rush clarity. It allowed it to arrive slowly, the way regret does. They checked their watches more than they checked corners. The streets offered no resistance, and that unsettled them. No drunks spilling from bars. No arguments. No noise to hide behind. The quiet followed them, staying just close enough to be noticed. They had planned for a fight. They had not planned for containment. One man stopped near a storefront window, adjusting his coat. His reflection showed someone else standing behind him. When he turned, there was no one there. The glass didn't lie. It simply remembered. They regrouped without speaking, instinct pulling them together. The city narrowed. Routes they thought were open suddenly fell closed. A door that should have been unlocked wasn't. An alley that promised escape felt too narrow to trust. None of this was violent. That was the problem. They began to realize that no one was challenging them because no one needed to. Harlem was not confronting them. It was positioning around them, quietly, efficiently, with a patience learned over decades. Every man carries a private belief about how danger announces itself. Shouting, running, blood. These men waited for those signs. And because they didn't appear, they kept moving forward, convincing themselves that absence meant opportunity. That belief was their mistake. A voice finally spoke, low and calm, from somewhere they couldn't identify. It didn't threaten. It didn't warn. It asked a simple question about where they were headed. No one answered. The silence that followed felt heavier than any gun. One of the 12 reached inside his coat. A hand appeared on his wrist, not gripping, just resting there. The message was clear. Not yet. They were guided now, though no one touched them again. Steps adjusted. Turns suggested themselves. The city flowed in one direction, and they moved with it, whether they wanted to or not. Fear arrived late. It always does when certainty collapses. They realized they were no longer acting. They were being allowed. Somewhere ahead, Bumpy Johnson waited, not in a place of his choosing, but in one that had chosen him long before tonight. The men understood then that they were not here to succeed. They were here to learn something. And Harlem, disciplined and loyal, was preparing to teach it without raising its voice. The room they were brought into did not feel like a trap. That was intentional. It was clean, orderly. Chairs arranged as if for conversation, not conflict. A mistake. Harlem was removed from his thinking, not as a target, but as a boundary. That restraint was Bumpy's victory. Back home, people spoke his name softly, not out of fear but certainty. Mothers trusted the streets again. Business resumed without protection fees rising. Trouble, when it appeared, stopped at the edges. Bumpy did not increase patrols. He did not issue warnings. He believed authority weakened when it demanded attention. The strongest presence was the one that didn't announce itself. Those who had watched from doorways the night before returned to their routines. They felt something rare, a sense of being protected without being controlled. That balance was his gift to Harlem. Bumpy carried on as he always had. Meetings held quietly. Debts settled calmly. Conflicts resolved before they grew teeth. Legacy was not something he spoke about. It was something he practiced. Years later, men would tell the story incorrectly. They would add noise, blood, shouting. Harlem would correct them with silence. 12 men went north. One walked back. That was the version that lasted. Because the truth wasn't in what was done. It was in what didn't need to be done afterward. Harlem stood intact. Respect held. Lines remained clear. And Bumpy Johnson's name stayed where it belonged. Not in headlines. Not in whispers of fear, but in the quiet confidence of a community that knew exactly who was watching over it.